Hi guys, welcome to another exciting episode of Éire's Epics in History. I'm your host, John Fisher. So today we're going to talk a little bit about Ireland's life after the Second World War, its livelihood, and its existence for the first time in a long time as an independent nation following the 1937 Constitution, which made it independent from the British Empire. Now, around the 1950s, we start to see the economy in Ireland improve. A lot of protectionist policies that were in place before that prevented it from embracing free international trade are removed. And an example being there was a duty on, there were heavy duties on imported goods and parts coming in that because of those heavy duties, the cost of labor in Ireland was expensive, so the cost of labor starts to go down. We also start to see in Ireland, it's still considered in many respects a poor country compared to other countries in Western Europe. In fact, it was considered a third world nation, but things are starting to change. Agriculture is still continuing to be the dominant industry. And while still high, we start to see a slow decrease in the number of people emigrating from Ireland. Now, in 1973, it ends up joining the European Economic Community along with Great Britain and Denmark. And unlike Great Britain, it actually ends up embracing the Eurocentric policies and values and lifestyle that comes with what is today the European Union. And an example of that is how it adopted the euro while Great Britain chose to retain the pound. And also Brexit, with Great Britain choosing to leave the EU. Those are just two examples of what makes Ireland different in terms of its European relations compared to Great Britain. Now, while things in Southern Ireland were starting to settle down, in the north, it was the complete opposite. You had the Unionists who were still the majority. They were still dominating the government, and they consolidated their party and made it extremely hard for Catholics to be represented. They removed proportional representation. That, along with partition, made it very hard for the Catholics to have any say or proper representation in government. For instance, in the nationalist majority, the Catholic nationalist majority city of Derry, even though there were more Catholics, the council was a unionist council. It was dominated by unionists. Catholics made up actually 1/3 of the population in Ireland, so they were very much treated like second-class citizens. And the Unionists, they tended to follow the policies passed in Westminster, so whenever a policy would go through in England, Northern Ireland would most likely adopt it. An exception was around security. They had a Special Powers Act in place that prevented political opposition. Now, what ends up happening is we start to, at this time, around the 40s, we start to see a change in attitudes taking place right after World War II. With the passage of the 1947 Education Act in Westminster, Northern Ireland also passes that, and this actually gives all its citizens, including Catholics, access to a better education, and that inspires many Catholics to begin fight in demanding that their rights be recognized. And eventually, around the late 1960s, we are ushered into what is known as the Troubles. Now, we're going to go more in depth about that in tomorrow's video, but basically the gist of it was you had Captain Terence O'Neill, who becomes Prime Minister of Northern Ireland in 1963. And he tries to improve relations with Dublin. And he's met with opposition in Northern Ireland. He's undermined by members of his own party. And in 1969, he resigns, moves to England, where he eventually dies in 1990. Now, what ends up basically happening is with the Troubles, around the late 1960s, the border between the Northern Ireland and the Republic becomes very militarized. I can't say the word. It becomes heavily fortified by the military, by British troops. This creates it's long detours for people trying to get around the British, and it ends up cutting neighbors off from one another who lived on either side of the border. And it actually creates a psychological effect where until the late 90s, where we start to see border controls relaxed, many people don't actually cross the border for years. So they don't see family or friends for years. So now, at the same time, around 1967, you have the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association formed, and they launch a series of nonviolent protest marches that were modeled after the Black Civil Rights Movement started by Martin Luther King Jr. Thanks. Sorry for for stopping awkwardly when I was saying your name, but for some reason I can't speak tonight. But anyway, so thank you, MLK. So basically, the Protestants respond by attacking these marches. They set the Royal Irish Constabulary, Protestant extremists, and B specials, which was like some kind of I don't know if it was military or police, but it was some kind of Protestant form of protection, and they set that onto the protesters. And what ends up, one significant event is the establishment of Northern Ireland's second university. Now, many people thought it should be built in the city of Derry because it seemed like, I don't know why, but for whatever reason at the time, it seemed like the obvious choice. Now, it ends up being built east of the River Bann and near the Protestant in town of Coleraine. And you have to understand that the government in Northern Ireland at the time was building a lot of industries east of the River Bann because that was densely Protestant. That's where a lot of Protestant populations were. So this university gets built near Coleraine, and many protesters say, no, it should be built in the city of Derry. They're protesting against it. And many Protestant Unionists just take to the streets and attack these protesters. They end up launching a series of attacks, burning their homes, especially around Belfast. And it gets so bad, and the number of Protestant Unionists attacking the protesters is so high that the British Army gets called in. And the Catholics at first welcome them because they think, oh, they're going to protect us, you know. And a lot of these attacks were launched by the Protestant right wing, which demands that Northern Ireland's government take stronger action against the protesters. And they know that any legislation that comes out is going to affect them very little. Now, Brian Faulkner, at this point, is Prime Minister of Northern Ireland. And he basically, he decides to pass what is known as internment without trial. It was a policy he used when he was Minister of Home Affairs in the 1950s to stifle IRA attacks. And you end up having 350 people arrested, many of whom were treated poorly and interned without a fair trial. And a lot of them end up taking their cases later to the European European Court, the European Civil Rights, the European Court of Human Rights. Oh God, I can't even pronounce the word. The European Council on Civil Rights, successfully. Yeah, I forgot that for a moment. But they end up going before the courts later on in life and end up getting repaid or some form of compensation. But these arrests, virtually all the people arrested were Catholic. Protestant agitators were ignored, and this creates a lot of resentment among Catholics in the north of Ireland, and it leads many of them to end up joining the IRA. And this is significant because it's the first time, because up until 1970, since the war, since the Civil War in Ireland, the IRA membership has been dormant. It really hasn't increased as much up until then. So, I mean, this, you know, this really is the beginning of what becomes known as the Troubles. For those of you who don't know, the Troubles were a period in Ireland that extended from the 1960s all the way to the mid to late 1990s, involving a series of IRA attacks as well as attacks from the British, and basically a standoff between both between Catholics in Northern Ireland and supporters of the IRA throughout Ireland against British rule. They are aiming to make Northern Ireland independent from Great Britain and united with the Republic of Ireland. But we're going to go more into that tomorrow. So thank you so much for watching this video. If you like it, please share it. And yeah, I can't believe it. Tomorrow's going to be our final video. I'm excited, a little sad, but very excited. So thank you so much for sticking with me so far on this fantastic journey. All right. Have a good night.